Noswaith dda, croeso, good evening, welcome to you all. My name is Owen Evans. I'm the Chief Inspector at Estyn, Prif Arolygydd Estyn, and welcome to our first Facebook Live. Quite a departure for us, but I think it's a great way of us being able to make our reports, our thematics in particular, more accessible to the sector. Tonight, we're going to hear about one of our landmark reviews into peer sexual harassment. We're going to be here for about half an hour. There'll be a chance for you to ask questions at the end. And in a minute, I'll pass over to Dyma'r, who will introduce the panelists. Tonight's session will be in English. However, if you want to ask questions in Welsh, then please do. And if you are interested in having a Welsh language version of this, please do get in touch. So I'm now going to hand over to Dyma'r, who's going to introduce himself and the panel and really go through the paper, what we found, how we did it, and some of the things to take away for the future. So without further ado, wedi'i Dyma'r.
Lovely, diolch yn fawr iawn. Thank you very much, Owen. Just as a quick introduction, Dyma'r Ellis ydy'n enw I. My name is Dyma'r Ellis. I'm an assistant director with Estyn and was a member of the team that was involved in the writing of this report. But my responsibility within Estyn involves safeguarding as well. So Delith, would you like to introduce yourself?
Noswaith dda, Delith Gray, HMI with Estyn. I was the author of the report.
Laurie?
Noswaith dda, Laurie Jones, Estyn. I was the editor of this report, so I was also a member of the team with Delith and Dyma'r.
Lovely, diolch yn fawr, thank you. I suppose that it would be useful just to give you some background and some context for the report before we start. And I'm sure that you were aware that Ofsted published a similar report in April 2021 for the Department of Education, who asked them to carry out what was really a rapid review of sexual abuse in schools and colleges in England. And the Minister in Wales then, in the statement in June 2021, referenced Keeping Learners Safe 2020 in his statement, saying that all staff working in education settings should understand and recognise the risks of peer-on-peer abuse and harmful sexual behaviour. So this led to a similar request then for us at the end of July 21 to undertake this review. But I suppose as we started the project, it became clear to us that this piece of work really needed more than just an inquiry. So to achieve this, we focused on reviewing the safeguarding culture and the processes within the school that help protect and support young people better. So we considered the incidences of peer-on-peer sexual harassment and how the school's safeguarding culture encourages and empowers pupils to stand up to their peers and report all forms of sexual harassment. But I think that the most important thing that the report summarises are the findings from questionnaires and direct discussions from pupils, from school staff, about the nature and prevalence of peer-on-peer sexual harassment, and importantly, how schools manage this. So it's important to note from the beginning that we were keen to identify effective practice during the school visits. And I think that we published some cameos and some case studies that particularly benefit to schools. So if you read them, as you prepare for the new curriculum, especially for the relationships and sexual education, then I'm sure you'll find the cameos and case studies really useful. So the sourcing of expert support from the outset was really important for this work, and it was different to the usual thematic activity and inspection work that we're involved in on a daily basis. To achieve this, we worked very closely with recognised experts, with academics, practitioners and support agencies to deliver what was a comprehensive project plan, as well as some resources that we used with the pupils. And before visiting the schools, we arranged some training events and professional learning for the team members. And I would like to show my appreciation to E.J. Reynolds from Cardiff University, the Children's Commissioner's Office, and also the NSPCC for their support. And also we worked collaboratively with CIW when we visited residential schools. So during the school visits, we held meetings with senior and middle leaders, with teachers, with staff, as well as focus groups with pupils. And during the meetings with staff and school leaders, we asked about their experiences in pastoral and safeguarding work. We asked staff about any direct training or relevant professional safeguarding development that they've had to carry out their roles, and also the time they have to do it. So with every group, we inquired about the prevalence of peer-on-peer sexual harassment in their settings. What proportion of bullying incidents involved peer-on-peer sexual harassment? How did they know? How did they identify the groups of pupils, whether they were perpetrators or victims? And we conducted focus visits, and this was a really, really important part of our work. Focus visits with pupils from year 7 to year 13. And these pupils consisted of around 16 pupils and were separated mainly male and female. But I'm going to ask Delith later on just to elaborate a little bit more on this approach. But a common theme was that the pupils welcomed the opportunity to talk to us in a safe, in a comfortable, friendly, enabling environment. And they valued being listened to. And if a school had a specific LGBT plus group, we included a focus group session with these pupils as well. Now, in 15 years as a head teacher, 10 years of working with Estyn, this has been the most emotional activity that I've ever undertaken. And it was a privilege to listen to the pupils talk openly and honestly about their experiences, their frustrations, their concerns about the normalization of peer-on-peer sexual harassment. And one particular conversation will stay with me forever. When I was talking to a group of LGBT plus pupils, I was wearing this rainbow wristband on my watch, which I always do. And one of the pupils asked me, "Are you gay, sir?" and pointed to the watch that I had. And I replied, "No, I wear this to support my own son who's gay. I wear it because I'm proud of him and in support of the LGBTQ plus rights." And he replied, he looked into my eyes, he grabbed my hand and he said, "I wish you were my dad." Now, doesn't that tell you so much about that young person's experience? But that will stay with me for forever. So that's the general overview of how we approach the work. But I am going to turn to some questions that we've had come in. I'm looking at the first one here, which is from Martin Jones, a member of the senior management team at a school in Pembrokeshire. And the question quite simply is, what did the report tell you? So I guess, Delith, you might be best placed to answer this as the author. And I guess that it's looking at the main findings, really, of the report. So Delith, would you like to take that one?
Diolch yn fawr, Dyfrig. Yes, in terms of main findings, what we found from our school visits was that pupils told us that around half of all pupils have personal experience of peer-on-peer sexual harassment, with twice as many girls than that of boys experiencing this kind of harassment. Also, notably, what pupils were telling us was that sexual harassment by peers happens more often online and after school, as opposed to during the time of school day. The types of harassment that were most common were making hurtful comments about body, size of body, looks, LGBT harassment, asking for sending and sharing nude photographs of peers, as well as girl shaming in online games. What we found was that good schools and strong schools dealt swiftly and effectively with incidents of peer-on-peer sexual harassment, and they also adopted a proactive and a preventative approach to this issue. However, in too many cases, pupils were telling us that they didn't tell their teachers systematically about peer-on-peer sexual harassment, or if they did, then teachers tended to dismiss, ignore, or class the harassment as some form of banter. However, in the good schools, teachers took matters seriously and dealt effectively with these concerns.
Yeah, it's that was something, a really strong message, wasn't it? That it was their lack of confidence at time not to address this as sexual harassment and consider it to be banter, and that was from both the pupils and the staff. So another question coming here from a teacher from Flintshire, and the question: how did you do the work, and how did you engage with the pupils and staff? Delith, are you okay to take that one? Can I put you on the spot again?
in our discussions with Welsh Government, we agreed that our focus would be secondary age pupils for this review, and therefore we engaged with 35 schools in total. 27 of these schools were secondary schools, 2 of them were all age schools, and then a further 6 schools were independent schools with secondary age pupils. In total, we engaged with around about 1,300 pupils. And in our school visits, 2 HMI visited every school. We visited at least 1 secondary school in every local authority in Wales. 2 HMI visited the school and conducted focus group activities with pupils. We did something a little different. We randomly selected 8 pupils from a year group and invited those pupils to bring along a friend to meet with us. And in our focus groups, we discussed the nature of harassment, the prevalence of it in the lives of young people, online, outside of school, as well as in school, how schools responded, how they felt about sexual harassment, and how that made them feel, how that's impacted on their well-being. We also discussed issues with school staff, head teachers, senior leaders who are responsible for the pastoral side and the personal social education in schools, and support staff as well as teachers, to gather their views and their experience of peer-on-peer sexual harassment.
Now, could you say a little bit more about our approach to when we were with the pupils, the way that we worked with them, and specifically refer to the booklets that we used? Because that was very different, wasn't it? We used the questionnaires and the booklets, and the fact that they were anonymous really did allow the pupils that freedom to share their experiences without the fear of being known or recognised by ourselves.
Absolutely. When we randomly selected pupils for the school, we obviously sought parental consent, and then pupils brought their friends with them. However, we didn't refer to pupils with their names, or we didn't ask for their names. We spoke in focus groups. We had a discussion type scenario, and we also had, with the advice and guidance of academics and other colleagues who work very closely with young people and who discuss sensitive topics often in their work, we conducted some sessions around identifying what constitutes sexual harassment by peers, what is the most prevalent type of sexual harassment in their lives, in their schools. Would that be perhaps sexual harassment on the bus, on the way to school, in the corridor, sending texts, making verbal comments, playing games, issues around the clothes that people wear, in particular girls. And we had discussions about, what they'd like to see happening from now on. Were there anything that they would like their school to stop doing, for example? And were there things that they'd like their schools to start doing? Pupils have personal social education lessons, although this is in terms of how often and for how long pupils have personal social education, that varies from school to school. But pupils are very vocal in saying that they wanted more opportunities to discuss these issues and other important issues to them in a safe and comfortable and enabling environment in schools, and that they would welcome more opportunities for relationships and sexuality education going forward.
Well, that was a very clear message as well, wasn't it, Deli, from all of the pupils? Diolch, Deli, thank you. Lowry, there's a question that's come in from David Wright, who asks what are Estyn expecting to see as part of the school's response to the report, and the evidence then of the recommendations being implemented. So are you able to talk about what we would expect the response to be from different schools, from the local authority, Welsh Government, and how would we evidence that those recommendations have been implemented?
Yes, so the report contains recommendations for schools and other education providers.
Are we all still there? We lost Lowry?
Am I still there? No?
I can hear you, Lowry.
Excellent. Diolch yn fawr, Del. So the report contains recommendations for schools, local authorities and for Welsh Government. There are 4 recommendations for schools. One is around a whole school preventative approach. And one of the things that the report contains is many cameos of interesting practice that we identified on our visits. And these are easily identifiable in the report because they're in green boxes. You can scan for them easily. And these are things that education providers can emulate and adapt to their own context. There are plenty of ideas there in the report. It also contains a recommendation around healthy relationships, sex and sexuality education. Pupils very much valued this. They talked about how much it was valued, but we do recognise as well that because of pressures on the curriculum, that they don't always have the time to discuss these issues in these lessons and so on. So the recommendation around that. There's another recommendation around the recording and analysing of data around the incidences of peer-on-peer sexual harassment and bullying, and how the school both records them but also analyses that information. And there's another recommendation for the local authorities linked to that as well. And the last recommendation for schools is around training for staff, particularly around the provision for PSE. I spoke earlier about the value that young people placed on those lessons around PSE and the opportunities to discuss matters such as these, as well as other aspects linked to PSE. Something that we did a bit differently with this particular report was to publish some supplementary materials alongside. So in terms of what schools can do, there's a range of things that if you go on our website and you find the report, then you'll find a link to these supplementary materials. So they actually contain the focus group booklet that we use, that Dallas just mentioned, those activities. It contains the tutor booklet so that teachers can use those materials to help them to implement those sessions with young people. And there's also a very detailed overview of our findings. So should schools wish to undertake those activities, they can compare the findings in their school or provider with what we found nationally. Alongside that, in that particular resource is a digest, if you like, of a whole range of resources that are available in Wales from organisations other than ourselves mainly, but also from Welsh Government. There's a little description of each resource and also a link to that resource. So schools, in response to the question from David, they need to find what's right for their school and for their provision in terms of things like PSE and giving young people opportunities to discuss. So there's a whole range of things that can be used there. And last but certainly not least, in terms of what we've provided for support for schools, is that we published a learner version of this report in May of this year. So it's a much shorter version of the report. It's written in youth-friendly language. And at the back of that report, there's a set of questions that learner groups such as a school council maybe, or an LGBTQ+ group can use to find out what's happening in their school. There's a whole range of things that schools and other providers can do in response to the recommendations that we've made. And there are also materials available to help them to start talking a bit more about this important issue, because one of the most important things that came out of the report is, one, how normalised young people felt it was in their lives. And so it highlighted for us the importance of discussing this issue and enabling young people to talk about it and to be comfortable in talking about it. And also that one of the most effective ways of combating the issue is to create that culture where young people do feel comfortable talking about the issue, that they're able to report incidences that happen in school or outside of school, and that those incidences are taken seriously.
Yeah, that's really important. It's not about banning mobile phones, is it? It's about changing the culture within the school so that pupils are comfortable to report incidences, but then that the school is proactive so that there's no need to report those incidences. So we get to a position where they are working closely with the pupils. And as I said, it's not about banning the mobile phone, it's about changing the culture. And of course, one of the most important things that we've done as well is in May of this year, we produced a learner version of the reports, which contains questions that learner groups such as school councils can use to find out what's happening in their school. We've got about 10 minutes left of our allocated time. So if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. Use the facility that you have before 6:30, before we log off. There is another question here that's come in from a teacher Val from RCT. And as you were writing the report, did what you saw and heard shock you in any way? A really good question. Delith, would you like to respond to that one?
To be honest, we weren't shocked or surprised by our findings, but because already with the findings of the Everyone's Invited work, we understood clearly that this issue was prevalent in the lives of young people. What surprised us and to be honest, delighted us was that the readiness and the bravery of young people to share their experiences, to be open and transparent in their views and their opinions. And that was something we didn't foresee to be as strong as it was. And I would like to take this opportunity to commend those young people that took part in all those schools, all 35 schools, for their bravery, for their readiness to discuss with us what is, essentially a very sensitive topic. As Laurie explained, it has become normalized in their lives, and that's very sad to note. However, they were so eager to discuss these issues, understanding fully that this is a societal issue. It happens, it's prevalent in the lives of adults. In the reports, we highlight some research that has taken place, around what happens in adult lives. This is something that, is a societal issue. Naturally, what happens in society boils into school, and schools have to deal with these issues, on top of everything else they do. And we recognise those good, strong schools in the report. So we weren't necessarily shocked at the findings, but we were surprised at how open and eager young people were in wanting to discuss these issues and find solutions for them.
Diolch, Delith. We have had one question in Welsh. Dwi wedi cael un cwestiwn yn y Gymraeg. I'll respond to that in Welsh and I'll give you a quick translation afterwards. Felly'r cwestiwn, oes modd wneud unrhyw gymhariaeth gyda hyn sy'n digwydd mewn ardaloedd eraill yn y Deyrnas Unedig a gyda'r canfyddiadau hyn yn unigryw i Gymru? Yr ateb syml ydy na, dydyn nhw ddim yn unigryw i Gymru. Maen nhw'n canfyddiadau sydd yn debyg iawn i'r hyn roedd Ofsted wedi canfod yn ei adroddiad nhw. Mae'n ymwneud â'r hyn sydd wedi cael ei drafod eisoes, sef hyfforddiant i'r athrawon fel bod nhw'n hyderus i ymateb i hyn, ac sicrhau bod y cwricwlwm yn cefnogi yr hyn sydd angen ei wneud yn yr ysgol, fel bod y disgyblion yn teimlo yn gyffyrddus wrth adrodd am yr hyn sy'n digwydd, a bod rhywbeth yn digwydd ac yn cael ei wneud amdano fe. So the question very, very simply was, can we make a cymhariaeth, and can we make a comparison to what's happening in the UK, or rather what we found specific to Wales? And the answer simply is no. What Ofsted found in their report mirrors what we found in ours. And it's to do with the training of the staff, to empower them to feel confident in order to deal with what's going on in the school, and that the curriculum then reflects that need, and that the curriculum addresses the issues that are highlighted in our report. But no, they're not specific to Wales. They are, UK-wide. Felly, diolch yn fawr iawn. Thank you very much for that question.
And to add to what you said, Dyfrig, in terms of those good schools that were giving ample opportunities for pupils to discuss, not in, highly structured lessons with lesson plans, but it was in that form time in the morning with their form teacher, in PSE lessons, in discussions in their English and Welsh lessons when they were talking about societal issues. Schools that were open to discussion, that was something that was a particular strength, but also other schools who had, for example, suggestion boxes, concern boxes dotted around the school where people could share some of their experiences. And also having older pupils as mentors for younger pupils and available to them during break times and lunch times. And in very few very strong schools, there was a practice of having LGBTQ plus pupils acting as advisors really for school leaders and suggesting ways of dealing with negative attitudes towards them as a particular group and towards other groups and pupils as well.
It's about creating that culture, isn't it, Delith, and celebrating diversity. And you just mentioned a few examples of effective practice there, and schools are doing some very innovative things. And I would urge people to have a look at the report and a look at those cameos in green boxes. Another one was the trusted adult scheme, where every child in the school had a trusted adult that they could approach. So there are plenty of ideas there that schools and other providers can adapt to their own context.
Certainly, and we would encourage you to to look at the case studies, the cameos that we have, which does show some real good practice that we came across during our work, both in maintained and in independent schools. Of course, this was the first time that we've actually included independent schools in this type of thematic work. We're coming up to the end. There aren't any more questions that have been posted, but I would like to thank you all for attending. This, as Owen said, was our first Facebook Live event. Hopefully we'll be able to build on this and do similar events in the future. We hope that you found this useful and an engaging format, and we leave here with some additional knowledge and understanding of the subject in hand. Just in closing, though, this is a very real issue for young people and education providers across Wales and beyond. But by offering opportunities for open and honest discussions in a supportive environment, we can support pupils better as they grow and develop into young adults. So just finally, a reminder that our full report on peer-on-peer sexual harassment among secondary school pupils in Wales is on our website, as well as the learner-friendly version of the reports and the resources that we referred to for providers. So the links will be shared.
We may have lost Devrig, I'm not sure. Have we lost
I'd
Devrig?
like to say that the links will be shared, and if there are any further questions, that we'd be able to address those in a document or in another Facebook Live, possibly.
Felly, na ddod â popeth I cloi, I'll just wind everything up. Can I just thank the panellists for tonight? Delith, diolch yn fawr. Lowry, diolch yn fawr. Delith, Dyfrig, who's frozen, diolch yn fawr. We missed one question which I've seen pop up. Natalie, we'll try and get back to you via Twitter or Facebook to answer the question, because I'd like to see all questions answered. Ond diolch o galon I chi am ymuno ni heno. Thank you very much for joining us. If you think this is the sort of thing you want to see from Estyn, let us know. But I think this is a very, very important report, and I'm glad you were able to join us this evening. Felly, diolch yn fawr I chi gyd. Thanks so much. Enjoy the sun. Gwnewch yr haul.